First Reformed is a drama film about a solitary, middle-aged Protestant pastor of a small-town historical church in upstate New York on the cusp of celebrating its 250th anniversary. Mostly a tourist attraction nowadays, catering to a dwindling congregation, it is eclipsed by its nearby parent church, a much bigger church which owns the historical landmark. When a pregnant parishioner asks him to counsel her husband, who is a radical environmentalist, our reverend will find himself faced with questions of faith, morality, and worldly concerns, all the while grappling with his own tormented past and equally despairing future. Writer and director Paul Schrader is no newcomer when it comes to filmmaking. He has written scripts for 4 Martin Scorsese films, those of them being Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Bringing Out the Dead, all the while dabbling in directing himself with films like Blue Collar, Hardcore, Light Sleeper, Affliction, and Autofocus, among many others. If we are to examine these films, we can definitely recognize certain reoccurring themes, like having a very broken and very traumatized male protagonist who is very lonely and very furious on the inside, who goes on this self-destructive path, undertaking actions that many times work against him, threatening his health, his sanity, and maybe even his life, and the endings of the films many times incorporate this element of redemption, preceded by a painful sacrifice or a grandiose act of violence. And that's exactly what Paul Schrader does here as well. He sort of takes this very deliberate story structure and character archetype that has worked so well for him in the past and really finds a way to contemporize it, really finds a way to make it relevant in a present context, both in relation to his own filmography and also in relation to the fact that he is now an older man, most probably thinking about the world in a much more mature manner and in a much less self-centered way. It's very interesting how his protagonists oftentimes end up going against something that's much bigger than them. Now, these are characters who are really struggling, but they are struggling for something that they deem to be a noble cause, a just cause that they just didn't detect before earlier in their lives. In the case of this film, we have a reverend who is sort of balancing against another reverend who indeed has a much bigger church and who indeed is overseeing his life in certain ways, but only because he is a much more of a charismatic and funny guy, rather than he is a great pastor or a very deep thinker or anything like that. And this really doesn't seem to affect our main character. He really seems like a very humble guy who sort of takes what he can get. His crisis is much less of a material one, He really doesn't care that the organ is not working in the church or that there are not enough seats in the church or anything like that. It really doesn't matter to him. His crisis is much more of a spiritual one. It's much more of a personal one. You see, he has lost his son, he has lost his marriage for what was pretty much his fucking fault, and he is also in danger of losing his faith as well. Now that's when this couple comes along. Now, like I said, the husband is this radical environmentalist who is incredibly concerned about the climate change issues we are currently facing, and he wants his pregnant wife to abort their baby because he doesn't think it's okay to bring a child into this rapidly changing world that is about to be plunged into chaos and destruction, and one that is about to be rendered uninhabitable. Now, this is a guy who knows every single statistic, every single piece of information, and every single detail about this subject, and what's more, he's really not a religious man. So you would expect someone like this to really challenge our pastor's beliefs, but it really doesn't. Quite the contrary. It really seems to be something that ignites something in him and something that intrigues him as well. Inevitably, he clashes with the political side of the discourse as well, of course. You see, the upcoming anniversary of the church is to be attended by some very important figures, among them being a very notable industrialist who is the sponsor of the parent church. At the dinner meeting, our reverend argues with this guy over climate change, which he dismisses as something complicated and as something with inconclusive evidence, obviously in an attempt to sweep the discussion under the rug. But you see, by this point, our reverend very much sees it as a straightforward and urgent matter, something not to be ignored or postponed. And that's something so incredibly special about this movie. It feels so incredibly relevant for our time, a time in which it truly appears that we are about to be the architects of our own demise. And the film really raises some very interesting discussions about how our spirituality intersects with the way we live as a species in this world. You see, the passion of this young guy for the environment really awakens something in our main character that probably hasn't been there since his military days, and that is a clearer vision of the world, a deeper purpose, It's where this whole going against something much bigger for a just cause that's so very much specific for Paul Schrader movies really kicks in. So basically what we have is this middle-aged guy who is being inspired by these younger people. There's a very interesting part in the film in which, at a meeting, a teenager speaks out against our pastor, speaks out against this more pacifist approach to preaching he has, and he says that with these young people today, there's really no middle ground. It's all about extremes. There's a subtle foreshadowing for his own behavior and for his own perspective later down the line. I think it's very interesting how in this film he constantly talks about despair and hope and the relationship between the two. And I think it's really interesting how in his case, despair gives way to hope, hope that he can change something about the world, but also it works vice versa, how hope gives way to despair. Despair that while all the solutions to fix our world really seem to be right in front of us, nobody really seems to be doing anything. Nobody really seems to be acting on them. And one last thing I want to mention is that I thought it was very interesting how this character, this man, approached women, or rather distanced himself from them. Because Ethan Hawke has said that he really wanted this to be the sort of lean away performance, in the sense that the more someone responded to him, the more he felt the need to retreat and to make himself less accessible as the story went along. And that's indeed the case. There is one woman in this film who is very specifically interested in him romantically, and the more she comes towards him and the more she shows her affection towards him, the uglier his reactions get. And it's really very sad and very pathetic to see how someone with a tragic past can really get caught up in his own shell. I really like this film and I definitely recommend it. It has great performances, it's very complex, and it's definitely one of my favorites of the entire year. So my question to you guys would be, what are some of your favorite films about masculine vulnerability, about masculine fragility? Don't forget to leave your answers down below in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can see you guys later in other reviews. Thanks for watching this review, folks. I love you for it. Keep watching me, keep watching movies, and what can I say? I'll see you soon. Goodbye.